A lot of us are feeling overwhelmed in our professional lives. And a lot of times we blame our workload for that. Too many meetings, too much email, all the administrative work, the priorities that are constantly changing with unrealistic deadlines. But what if workload isn't really the problem? What if the real issue isn't how much work you have, but everything that comes with it? The constant context switching, like multitasking, the emotional labor of managing up and down and sideways, the mental tabs that are probably still open as you're trying to fall asleep at night. And if you're a manager, the pressure of knowing that you're accountable for your team's success, but also knowing that you're barely keeping your own head above water. Today's guest, Liane Davey, argues that we've been diagnosing this all wrong, that it's not about workload, but about something she calls thought load, the hidden combination of cognitive demands, emotional burden, and depleted energy that's the real killer of performance. If she's right, then working harder isn't the solution, working differently is. Liane is a New York Times bestselling author, leadership advisor, and someone who has spent decades inside teams trying to figure out why smart, capable people so often feel stuck and burned out and ineffective. In her new book, Thought Load, she offers a different lens and a very practical playbook for escaping the madness. Today, we're going to be challenging some deeply held assumptions about productivity and leadership and what it really takes to do great work. I'm J.R. Lowry. This is Career Sessions. Liane, thanks for joining me today.
I'm so glad to be here, JR. Looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, nice to speak with a fellow Page 2 author. Your book is coming out 2 weeks after we're recording. It will be out by the time this is live. It's called Thought Load. Let's get right into it. So you make a key argument in the book that what's overwhelming all of us isn't our workload, but it is our thought load. So explain the difference for us.
Workload is the effort that you put into producing outputs that are the key pieces of your job, right? I sent the report, I got the signed contract, whatever. Thought load is much bigger than that. It's everything other than the actual work. I call it an invisible tax on our performance that comes from rising cognitive demands. So everything we have to pay attention to, so the work and everything else. Increasing emotional burdens, because we're living in an emotionally dysregulated society and there's a lot of emotional residue sitting on us, and how we're trying to do all of that with declining energy reserves. So workload is what you have to actually accomplish for your job. Thought load is what you actually have to cope with as not only an employee, but a human and all you carry with you. And of course, the problem is the higher your thought load, the harder it is to get through your workload.
It makes intuitive sense once you explain it that way. And certainly as I was reading the book, I was thinking about, my most recent full-time experience. The workload was always high, but it became impossible when you're getting assaulted from all sides, assaulted from vendors, assaulted from employees, not in a physical sense to be clear, assaulted from above, board, boss, all of those things.
Yep.
And when all of that's hitting you, it's a lot harder to maintain that emotional regulation and the multiplier effect, if you want to think about it in the way of thought load being a multiplier on workload. It goes from being like 1x to being like 10x. And it just makes it almost impossible to keep up with things because you're never at your best and you're constantly having to play defense on one of those things and the work's still there.
Exactly. And you finally carve out an hour to make some meaningful progress, but the thought load is so high that you get distracted as you're going, or the emotional stuff is making you feel like, am I even up to doing this? And all of that means that hour doesn't actually get you as much forward momentum as you hoped it would. And then you spend the next hour feeling crappy about the fact that you just wasted the last hour. So it is multiplier effect in a negative direction.
So what was the moment where you kind of had the aha about the idea of thought load?
There were two key spots. So before COVID, people kept asking me as a keynote speaker to talk about change management. And I had this reaction, kind of like as a psychologist, our reaction to change has been the same for millennia. And anyone who's trying to tell you differently doesn't understand how the brain works. I thought it was a little dull until I started looking at not how the human reaction to change is any different, but how change has changed in organizations. And Gartner released a study that was probably the first moment that showed that in 2016, the average employee faced 2 enterprise-level transformations each year, and only 6 years later, it had gone from 2 to 10. And that's the moment when I had my first kind of realization that change has changed. And we need to manage differently in this perpetual change than we did in our simpler era. And so that's when I started thinking about how we have to manage our attention and manage our anxiety and manage our energy. So actually kind of the core of the thought load equation came then. But it was in front of a live audience giving a keynote. Somebody asked a question at the end and said, yeah, but isn't our workload way too high to do this? And live from the stage, I just came out with, it's not our workload that's killing us, it's our thought load. And as soon as I created the word live in front of an audience, the room went silent. And all I could do was kind of go, could somebody write that down?
You probably wanted to run off the stage and go make a bunch of notes on it, right?
Write the book, write that, right? And those two pieces. So first I had to have this realization that change has changed and we need to manage ourselves and one another differently in perpetual change. And secondly, realizing that we've been putting way too much attention on workload and what we have to really think about is our thought load. Those were the two pennies had to drop before I was really off and running.
I have done a lot of transformations in my day, and you do realize as you do more of them that it's not just managing people through change like, oh, I have to do something differently than I did it yesterday. It's more of the human part of getting through that, even for the project team themselves. They'll be completely committed to the end state, but when these things go on for months and months or even multiple years, I mean, the adage of it's a marathon, not a sprint, it's a little bit trite, but at the same time, it's true. I was giving a talk probably about a year ago at a conference over in London on this very topic of how do you manage the human element of these big transformation programs? Because I think that's arguably the hardest part. It's not the technology, it's not the process change. It's just bringing people in the project team and around the project team along for the duration of that journey and keeping them engaged, especially to your point, when it's like, this follows the last change, or it's going on in parallel with 3 other changes. And it's constant change, constant change, constant change.
Yeah.
It's hitting us all the time. It's really hard for people to keep up with it. And I think that's a big factor that's hitting at this idea of thought load as well.
And that change team, it's their primary role. Now think of all the people who are on the receiving end of the transformation. And, the thought load equation is terrible. So A, you're asking me to do this kind of off the corner of my desk. So with 1/10 of my attention. B, you're probably not creating a forum for me to process the emotions that are coming up for me about whether this change is going to make me redundant or change my control or whatever else. And you're expecting me to just do this change after the last change and burning me out. It's one thing for the team that's actually central and focused on the transformation. But then if you think about everybody on the receiving end, it's even worse. We're really amplifying this thought load effect in our organizations at our peril, I think.
At our peril, I agree. We've talked a little bit about the 3 things that you talk about in the book, the cognitive demands, the emotional burden, the energy depletion. Why is it so important to think about all of them in combination and not individually?
There's a lot of people out there talking about each of them separately, but nobody's talking about all 3 together. And the reason is, and this is partly my husband and my business partner, who's a neuroscientist who helps me understand, that each of the 3 components both amplify and exacerbate the others. I'll give you a couple of science-based examples. So as your energy reserves run out, particularly your frontal lobe, which is your executive functioning, which runs out fairly quickly because it burns a lot of glucose and releases a lot of glutamate. So your frontal lobe kind of goes offline fairly quickly. When it does, one of the first things to go is your ability to calibrate what should I pay attention to and what should I not. So all of a sudden the cognitive demands go up as you're paying attention to everything. The next thing to go is your ability to differentiate between something that's actually a social threat and something that was just like a sarcastic remark or a, whatever. And so as your energy goes down, your emotional burden and your cognitive demands go up. Another interesting one is one of the most common emotional burdens for us is anxiety right now, particularly anxiety about our workload and how much we have to get done. So what we find is that as your anxiety rises, you try and multitask. So you increase your cognitive demands. And as you multitask, your energy depletes faster and your productivity suffers and your quality suffers. So you're doing that in the wrong direction. The reason you need to understand and really try and tackle all 3 is that if you only solve 2 of them, particularly if you try and ignore the emotional things, our brains are very wired for fear to just take out everything else. So you could be building the nicest time management plan, whatever else. If something hijacks you because you've decided it's a risk to your belonging in the group or whatever else, it doesn't matter how great your time management plan was. So that's why we need to think about them, because physiologically, each one of them amplifies and exacerbates the other. So we have to sort of deal with them together.
And it's especially hard for managers or leaders because they're not only having to worry about themselves, they also have to worry about this for their teams. How do you help managers figure out even where to start with this?
The answer for managers is start with yourself, because managers with very high thought load leave a very big wake behind them. If you are struggling to know what to pay attention to and trying to juggle many balls, your team is going to be looking to you for prioritization, and they're not going to find it. They're just going to be looking at somebody who's like, it's all important, right? And so if you are emotionally triggered in some way, impatient, frustrated, feeling demoralized, the emotional contagion from a manager to their team is incredibly potent. So you're going to leave them just feeling deflated as well. So start with yourself is the answer. And in starting with yourself, I encourage folks to start with focusing their attention, because it's really hard to deal with the emotional stuff or to get your energy back if you haven't zoomed in on what really matters first. Start with your attention, then learning some of the emotional literacy that we really don't have so that you can process your emotions more quickly. And then you can work on the energy. And certainly you can dabble in them all. But I think the first thing is your attention. And once you've created some order in the chaos in your own head, then you've got a hope of going out and supporting your team. But if you are leaving a big wake behind you, both in terms of priorities and emotional residue, there's little hope that you're going to help your team.
You know, a lot of people think that time is the most precious resource. I've certainly said that to my team again and again and again, but you make the point that it's really your attention. Time is limited. Attention is even more limited, which is what makes it more precious. And you've got some great tips to help people think about how to focus themselves in on what really matters. Share some of those for us just to give our audience some practical takeaways.
I love it when we talk about time as if somebody magically has more than 24 hours in the day. I'm like, no, time is fixed. We all have the same amount of time. So how do you actually think about both your attention and your energy in that time? And that's what I was alluding to earlier. If you have 1 hour and you have that 1 hour with a low thought load, with real clarity on the most important thing you need to accomplish, with everything ready to go when you start the hour, with, the things that are kind of weighing on you parked for a time when you'll address them, then in that hour, with both strong attention and good energy, you will move through so much. You'll get so much accomplished versus I literally had this morning. I thought I had a meeting at 9 a.m., but it turned out it was 10. So I sit down at my desk, I get my microphone ready, I'm all good to go. And I open my calendar and see that I have an hour. But interestingly, I wasn't ready to have an hour then. So I didn't know what's the most important thing. I'm in the middle of a book launch. There are a million things I should be doing.
Right.
But I didn't know. I didn't have focus. It was in the morning. I hadn't kind of got moving yet. And so I made very little use of that hour that could have been really, really meaningful. So it's really figuring out, how do I have a clear quest? What is it that I have to accomplish? How do I have mise en place? How do I have everything ready so that when I start to work, I don't have to open my email to find something? Because if you open your email to find something, I promise you something else is going to distract you. Or if you have to go on the web and search for something or whatever else. So how do I do that? How do I go in with clarity and remove the distractions? So it's not having the hour. We can usually make the hour. It's what do we make of the hour, right? So that we actually get something meaningfully done. If that happens at the end of the hour, then also you get this emotional lift. Wow, right. That feels amazing. I shipped that code. I sent that contract. I did the thing. And then the next hour is going to have the benefit. I always talk about it is if you have to do something hard, start on a downhill. So if you've just had that hour, the next task is going to feel like you're starting on a downhill. I got momentum here. Let's go. Follow that energy. Time is not the issue. When you have the time, the same 24 hours as I have, how do you use it?
I was a COO of an asset management firm at one point. I had as many as 1,000 people working for me. So a big role. And I say that not to brag about it, but to put it in stark contrast to the life I'm living right now. Yeah. I mean, my days there were very busy, but they were also very programmed. So you knew how certain pockets of your time were going to be used a day in advance, a week in advance, sometimes even longer in advance. What I'm finding now that I'm doing my own thing is I got to figure out what every day looks like. And I have found it much harder to be focused and much harder to get good use out of my time because there's a million different things that I could be doing.
Yeah.
And I've literally had to block, I'm going to spend 30 minutes on this task. I'm going to spend an hour on this task. And that's the only way that I'm finding that I am able to get through things and to do them well and to feel like I'm productive. Otherwise, I kind of get to the end of the day and feel like I got pulled in 15 different directions today and I didn't get anything really done. And that's something I never really felt to the same degree, even running a big organization in a corporate job. That's been a real learning for me over the past roughly year that I've been doing this. And I think I'm still learning, to be honest with you, about how to really focus my attention and get as much out of those hours as I can.
I love that you're being authentic about that because I feel every bit of it. This is year 11 for me in running my own business. And I think I got to a pretty good point on being productive when all of a sudden I ran into this massive, very painful realization that while I was being incredibly productive, it was not effective. And realizing that while I was patting myself on the back for creating a lot of output, that output wasn't moving the needle on the things that I cared about. And that was excruciating. I had for 12 years written a blog every single week, and I was so proud of myself. I would look down on the people who started a blog or a podcast and only did it for like 7 weeks or whatever. And you're like, oh, those people. And I was so proud of myself for just churning it out. But at some point, I said, in 2026 is what people are looking for from advice about achieving amazing things together. Are they looking in the same places? Do they need the same kind of content? And the answer was no. Here I was so proud of how productive I was and not asking the hard questions about, but is that productivity in service of the ways I want to change the world? That's the other thing. If we can make the transition from focusing on activity to output, that's good. That's an improvement because responding to a lot of emails never changed the world. So it's good if we get out of that. But an even harder shift because our world right now is incredibly focused on productivity and just not nearly focused enough on, is that productivity serving anything? And AI is the greatest example of that. AI makes it really easy to create a lot of schlock that is not going to change anything. The good news for an entrepreneur is that at some point you go, oh, well, if I am really clear on my quest in the world, on the outcomes I'm trying to create, maybe there's a bunch of stuff I don't need to do. Maybe I can have a better life while running this business. So yeah, it's very interesting. But I had to make the epic fail before I figured that one out the hard way.
We're all having to let go of a lot of things right now in terms of the way that we've done them in the past. And AI is driving that. It's probably the single biggest factor at the moment. But it's not the only one. And I think that's really hard. I mean, if you're a content creator, that world's changed tremendously in the last 5 years. And if you're not making changes, then you could certainly, and you talk about activities and outputs and outcomes, you have to continue to focus on outcomes, right? I mean, ultimately, if you're an entrepreneur, your job is to bring revenue in for yourself and your company, if there are others around you. Doesn't matter how many likes you get or how many impressions you get or how many followers you have. None of that stuff, it's all helpful.
Even there are places where getting views are not the views that actually are helpful, right?
Yeah.
So it can be vanity.
There are vanity metrics. People talk about that a lot in the creator space, but I think there are vanity metrics in the corporate world as well, right?
Of course there are.
And it's easy to get drawn into them. Like I cleared my inbox out today, or I went to 5 meetings today, or I put out 3 articles, on the corporate intranet site or whatever the case may be. But if you keep yourself focused on the things that really matter, then it will help focus your attention. And you have another framework I thought was really helpful, this idea of the 3 priority lists.
Yeah. When you have high thought load, having a to-do list is a nightmare. First of all, because every time you look at it, it's demoralizing. But secondly, because when your thought load is high, you tend to pick what to do off that list using a terrible criterion. Maybe that criterion is which of those tasks is associated with the scariest person, or what's the one I just wrote down? Like, what's the thing that just came into my inbox? I'll just do that one. So when we have high thought load, having just one long to-do list isn't helpful. But if we can understand that most of us operate on 3 to-do lists, at least for work. The first one is, what are the things I need to do to advance my quest? The thing that I'm here to accomplish. What's the number 1, number 2, and number 3 thing I could do that will significantly progress the things that matter most? We all need that list. But if you work in an organization, there's a second list because we don't live in Pollyanna world. The second list is other people's very important quests that they think I need to be a part of. Maybe you're an expert in the automotive industry and your firm's automotive account team wants you to come and be part of the team. Okay, that may be really important. And there's a wide variety for us in cross-functional organizations and matrix organizations where you need number 1, number 2, and number 3 a to-do list for ways you support other people. And then we all have the third list, which is the side quests. So I got to do the compliance training. I got to send my invoices. I got to book my travel. And if all of those things are on the same list, it's really easy to just look and pick off things for all the wrong reasons. But if you start with, I need to be making sure that the things from my number 1 list get slotted into the calendar first, and that the things from that side quest list get put in the lower value part of my week. They get put in between tasks or when I'm on hold with the help desk or whatever else. 3 priority lists, not 1, makes a world of difference.
You can't compare one versus the other, right? The thing that's really important that your boss has asked you to get done today may not be the most important thing really toward your outcomes, but you still have to do it. Or the thing that your kid really wants you to get done with them that night when you get home from work or whatever. And managing things and thinking about both the different lists and also how you use your time and marry your time up with that, I thought was really helpful.
It's also a great thing to be able to take your list to your manager. And if your manager asks you to do something, just share. It's Wednesday. I haven't made any headway yet on the things on my most important list. Where does that thing you're asking me to do fit in? How do you want me to prioritize that, right? When you're managing it that way and you look accountable and taking ownership of your time, that's a constructive conversation to have with your manager.
Let's talk a little bit now about the emotional aspect of this, the second of the 3. You describe it as kind of an invisible load. And you also talk about the fact that people in the middle of the organization are arguably dealing with even more conflict because they've got it below, they've got it across, they've got it up, they've got it at home. What advice do you give people to help them think about their own emotional load? And also this issue that you talk about in terms of emotional contagion, where a manager can infect their team, for lack of a better way of saying it.
Yeah, or be infected by their team. And we've all, as managers, had that day. I think what we're missing is emotional literacy in our society. So the starting place in the book is to talk about some of the neuroscience of how this works, which is that an emotion is a pre-conscious physiological experience we have in our body. There are a lot of data in emotions. There's lots to learn from emotions. They're there to keep us safe and help us kind of be effective in our environment. And they are very different from our feelings, which are the cognitive stories and narratives that we come up with to rationalize what we're experiencing in our body. And most of us don't know that. Therefore, most of us sort of believe our feelings as if they're true. We give them too much credit. We take too much stock in them. And while emotions can get us lots of data, feelings just get us lots of drama. So that's the first thing we need to understand is, first of all, there's no such thing as turning off your emotions at work because they are preconscious. But the key thing is to interrupt that fiction weaving process of telling yourself this grand story why they made you upset or they all these things that make us feel not in control of our own emotional experience of the world. So first of all, just understanding that and learning a process to intercept the emotional experience, learn from it, interrogate it before it turns into some great fiction. So that's the first piece. And then once we understand that that's what's going on, to be more attuned to it going on in the people around us, so that if they're having an emotional experience, we don't unintentionally or unknowingly pick it up, because that's what happens in emotional contagion. And you can feel a whole room go down. One person is feeling deflated and all of a sudden you feel the whole room go down. So the book really takes you through a process for how do I notice the emotion? how do I extract the data from that emotion? What is that about? Where is it coming from? What is it exactly? What story am I telling myself that is reinforcing how I'm feeling about this? And then to get to some kind of an action to make things better, teaching people how to process their emotions more efficiently, and then what to do if you're seeing that from somebody else and how to prevent that from spreading to you. So learning that emotional literacy of the difference between emotions and feelings, and then learning how to process our emotions more quickly so that they don't take us down or leave an emotional residue for the day or the week that's just really sitting in our thought load, just kind of bought real estate in our thought load. I'm just squatting here and I'm not leaving.
Love the story in the book where you were describing the snowstorm and being mad at your husband for taking one of your shoveling turns because you thought that it meant he thought you were weak. And he was really just trying to be nice. You describe this as an example of the fiction that we tell ourselves about why something's happening when it's not really true. One of the things I really took away from that part of the book is this idea of pulling the thread. You talk about knowing your treasure, and it would be great if you could help our audience understand this idea of how do you really get to the why you're feeling that thing, and sometimes how it's a multi-step approach.
As I was writing the book, I was trying to make the book what I described as buoyant. Like, how do I make this something that for somebody who has a heavy thought load, that it's kind of enjoyable to read, feels like something that lifts you up, helps you get your head above water.
Enter self-deprecation, right?
There's a lot of sharing with you all my fails. So we started with the knight on its epic quest. So when we got to the emotional section, I shared a story I've used for a long time, which is when the dragon is breathing fire, it's because they're protecting treasure. So if you on your noble quest bump into a fire-breathing dragon, to not do what we tend to do, which is build a wall of facts between us and the dragon. Well, you'll recall the email of April 2nd that said this and this, or in policy 17.3. Right? That does not help when a dragon is protecting their treasure. All it does is build this wall. The dragon's still back there. So the idea is that the fire from the dragon is the emotion, right? They're angry, they're yelling, they're crying, they're whatever it is. But if that's what you see, that's not the important point. That's just a good clue that, oh, somehow I'm encroaching on their treasure. They feel a threat, they're triggered, and that's what I'm seeing. And so the key thing is I talk about it as they're on the other side of the moat trying to protect themselves and their treasure, and you need to get them to open the drawbridge. So what can you ask? What can you try and understand? So what's at stake for you here? How are you imagine this playing out? What mistake do you think we're making? These kinds of questions that get the dragon to kind of open the drawbridge and draw you the map to what the treasure is in this situation. What is it that they value? What's precious to them that feels under threat with this conversation or this plan? So, once we understand the fire-breathing dragon metaphor, at some point you stop and you go like, oh, sometimes I'm the dragon. And so, yes, right? When we have that emotional reaction, something feels at risk. And that's how we protect. And so you can ask yourself the open drawbridge questions. What story am I telling myself that's causing me to react this way? How am I seeing this playing out? And then you can ask other questions like, what else might be possible? What else could be going on here? As you come up with answers, share those answers with the room. I think the reason that I just raised my voice there is I'm imagining having to go back to my team and tell them that I wasn't successful in advocating for our project. And I'm feeling like that reflects poorly on me as a leader. I think they're going to be upset with me. Right? Being candid in the room about what's going on for you, not in a way that's like, oh my God, I'm so angry. You're not like losing your cool, but you're doing the investigative work to figure out what's the treasure going on here and to open the drawbridge and share with everybody else. This is what's going on. It just creates a much more constructive conversation. I tell the story in the book of a real team where they were trying to figure out which projects to cut because they needed to do a big budget cut. And the leader was not engaging in the conversation very honestly or with integrity. He was trying to defend his thing. And it was because this is what he was imagining, having to go back to his team and tell them that 3 months of work was going to be wasted. And when he finally was able to say, this is what's going on, this is why I'm not having this conversation honestly, everybody else came right to his rescue. Like, okay, how do we help you? And how do we support you in getting the right message back to your team? And it was amazing because until then, everybody thought he was just being a dragon. And once they understood, oh no, that's meaningful treasure, we get it. All of a sudden they were on his side, trying to problem solve about how they did it. So it makes a massive difference. You got to know your own treasure. And the more you can understand the things that are likely to trigger you in any situation, the better prepared you are. But also when it happens to know, I got to do the work myself to figure out what's this about and to get that into the conversation. It's amazing how different it is. But, once I tell people about when the dragon's breathing fire, it's because they're protecting treasure. They'll tell me ages later, they're like, that's so helpful. I think about it so differently now.
What's a powerful metaphor? And I think it works really well. Let's talk about the last one. So I think about energy management. Tony Schwartz, that's how I was introduced to this. His firm came and did a training program when I was working at Fidelity, probably almost 20 years ago. Help us understand where that fits into this equation of thought load and how you can manage your energy in a practical sense.
If you think about the top of the thought load equation is the cognitive demands and the emotional burdens. That's the load. But I'm sure you can think of a day where you were carrying a really heavy load, no sweat. You're like, I got this, right? You're well rested. You're in a good place.
That was 1988. Yeah.
It was a great year. Right? Yeah. But then you could probably think of another day where even something that wasn't a very heavy load at all just felt too much because you were really depleted. So that's how energy factors into the equation. And so there's three things I talk about. We take our night and we get them past the fire-breathing dragons. And now they got to figure out how to fill their chalice, right? How do I fill my cup? How do I make sure I have the energy to keep going? So there's three things. One, how do I find waterfalls to fill my cup from? How do I get flow into my week? Work that matters, work I'm interested in, chunks of time where I'm able to work unimpeded, undetected. So finding waterfalls, but also finding wells. And I have an assessment tool that I share with folks on the website that allows them to figure out what is your unique brand of overwhelm. We have people who in overwhelm become whirlwinds of just like acting to feel busy. And we have other people who become sticklers who just go back to the rules because that makes them feel like things are a little more predictable. So there's 4 different styles. And knowing which one you are helps you understand what's the well you can dig deep and find energy from, whether that be planning an order or physical activity, or maybe you're rogue and you can actually deal with your overwhelm and build your energy by connecting with others more socially. Understanding that. So when you can't find a waterfall, you at least can tap a well of energy that you have. And then the third and final piece is, of course, if your cup has cracks in it, no matter how much you're doing to try and restore your energy, it's not going to help. So figuring out what's in your week, are there a bunch of meetings in your week that are like cracks in your cup? Are there relationships that are toxic? Are there conflict debts you have that because you're trying to work around that conflict debt, you're burning a lot of extra energy? So yeah, thinking about what are my waterfalls, what are my wells, and how do I make sure to fix the drains so that my energy becomes a renewable resource instead of what it feels like right now. It feels like we're burning fossil fuels in this sort of finite energy. I got no more left. And humans are the ultimate renewable energy machines if we treat our machines well.
Agreed. So there's a ton of things in the book, Liane. I think you did a great job of being practical and being buoyant. There's a lot that people can take away individually. For organizations and the leaders of those organizations, what message would you want to leave them with in terms of how they can better create the conditions for success to ease this thought load burden that's endemic around organizations?
I would say stop managing for workload and start managing for thought load. Managing for workload is not enough anymore. So if you don't know what's in your team's thought load, that could be tasks coming from parts of the matrix in the side door and the back door you didn't know about. But also, what are the stresses they're experiencing? What are the things that are burning them out? All of that sort of thing. So manage for thought load, not workload. And if we take one example, AI, of course, is that great example right now. that whereas chatbots and agentic AI may be wonderful for their workload, the research is showing it's really, really hard on thought load. So if you're going to integrate AI into people's workflow, great, but we need to understand how does it affect their cognitive demands? Where is it creating emotional triggers and making people less productive instead of more? How is using it, which, a lot of AI right now sends you off in like multiple directions. How is it burning our energy and is it doing it wisely? So as leaders, manage for thought load, not just workload, and you will find you get so much more creative work, more innovative, more collaboration, and just so much less stress. So it's a really, really positive thing when we can make that switch.
I think it's easier said than done.
It is.
A lot of organizations and leaders are so output focused. They're so financially driven that taking that step back, even since the end of the COVID pandemic, it feels like we've taken a big step back in having this kind of wellness, emotional health conversation that we are having in spades in 2020.
Yeah.
Because people view it as a distraction and they just want to ignore it because it doesn't help them hit quarterly goals. And I think that's unfortunate because I think we're just frying a lot of people right now.
But I do think the way you said it is true. We're focused on outputs, and burning people out may get us lots of output. But I'm quite convinced it does not get us the outcomes that we want. So those short-term measures that we're using may look healthy, but the long-term measures really, really aren't. So I don't even need a leader to believe that someone's thought load is intrinsically meaningful. But if you want innovation, if you want sustained performance, if you want a great customer experience, all of those things, I promise you that managing thought load is essential to getting the outcomes you want. And it's when we're stuck in this productivity trap of thinking just the more we churn out, the more effective we are as a corporation. I think that's why we're stuck.
I think that's a big part of why we're stuck too. Thank you. Thanks for doing this. As I mentioned at the outset, your book, Thought Load's going to be out by the time this episode airs. So people will be able to buy it right then and there and benefit from it. And thanks for writing it.
Oh, my huge pleasure. I needed to read it. And I need to live it. I'm constantly managing my own thought load too.
Well, thank you again. And
thanks, Jeff.
Have a great day. Terrific discussion with Liane just now. What do I want you to take away from what we talked about? First, and most importantly, is this idea that what is consuming you, what is overwhelming you, is not just your workload. It is your thought load, which plays a multiplicative effect on top of your workload. And this idea of cognitive switching, like multitasking, the emotional burden that we're all carrying, either because of things going on at home or at work, and depleted energy, which is definitely a crisis in the United States right now, if not elsewhere. All of these things contribute in a multiplicative way to the work that you're doing. It's not just the tasks on your plate. Second thing, as we're talking about cognitive load, attention is your most valuable resource. We talk a lot about time, and time is definitely very valuable, but you've got to make sure that you are using your time well. You can use your time poorly, and if you've got attention, it means you are using your time better. By definition, you will be more productive and you will be more effective. Then we talked about emotional load. That is a big part of the job right now. We are all carrying a lot. We're always carrying a lot, whether it's driven from things going on at home or at work. And if you're a manager, you're carrying that from your team and potentially contributing to their thought load because you are bringing your emotional burden in and creating the sense of contagion to them in addition to them doing it to you. And then finally is this idea of energy being a huge performance lever. It's how you manage both the things that bring you energy and the things that deplete your energy. You have to constantly keep enough gas in the tank. And so if you're not doing enough things that bring you energy and you're doing a lot of things that deplete it, you're just going to burn yourself out. And then you're not going to be able to have attention. You're not going to be able to handle the emotional aspects of your job. And so all these things are related. Again, terrific discussion with Liane. Her book, Thought Load, is available. If your interest has been piqued by today's conversation, please go buy the book. Thanks for listening today. I invite you to subscribe to Career Sessions on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, YouTube, or any of the other podcast platforms that are available. And if you found this discussion enlightening, sign up for my membership community, which is called Pathwise, and subscribe to our newsletter, which is called Path Wisdom. Thanks. Have a great day.